So, okay. I've been asked to work for an hour and a half in relation to simply offering a lecture. I am going to do that, and it is going to be fairly dense. So I would like you please to take notes, to note down your questions, the places you agree, the places you don't agree, the places that make no sense at all, and we will get to that in the discussion. Ooh. Okay. I have two. I am a two-spirit. Okay, so here we are. We all know that this is the third day, but it is the second day.
You can move the computer, yeah.
That's that?
Yeah. Again, go on.
Yes. This is me. This is my email address. This is where I hang out. Please feel free to contact me now or at any other time, now that I have had the honor to meet you. And obviously I want to say thank you to CODESRIA, to Aminata Diao, who is the person who is responsible in CODESRIA for the Gender Symposium, to Sylvia, and to all the resource people, particularly those whose lives I have been making difficult this morning. Bonjour. I'm here till the end of Friday, and I'm very happy to interact with any of you on your project now or later online. I do a lot of online work, so working online is not something that is always the same as working face-to-face, but it can still be quite productive. And what have I been asked to do? Oh, it is an impossibility, what I have been asked to do. I've been asked, thank you Sylvia, I've been asked to work with you in 3 different areas. And that's Wednesday, today, Thursday, and Friday. And each of these areas has a link to the next one. So if we don't finish something today, we will get to it tomorrow. And there is a logic in what I want to discuss with you. Today, feminist theories on sexualities and questions of masculinities. Tomorrow, we need to take the question of history very seriously. And on Friday, we'll look at what it means to research in spaces in which the politics of subversion and resistance and change are core to what we are looking at. So we know that I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes just picking up from where we were yesterday. We were given a particular connection between this seminar and the whole mission of CODESRIA, right? And after, I'm not going to go through each point by point. After Ibrahima Sal had reminded us that the project of decolonization in Africa included the project of decolonizing the mind, the independence of the mind, he moved to saying that taking up the question of sexualities was a question of courage. We began to look at what that meant yesterday, but I think we need to surface that within the whole of the symposium. What is that courage for each of us? What does that mean? What it meant for Ibrahima Sal and CODESRIA might not be what it means for us individually, and we need to look at that. But we started with the concepts that Sylvia introduced us to, with the notion of sexing as a biological process that was dichotomized. We looked at the term becoming gendered, intersectionality. We threw around terms like masculinities, femininities, sexualities, and I just found a little quotation that some of you might find useful from a theorist called Amina Mama that kind of encapsulates what Sylvia was introducing us to right at the beginning of yesterday. She wrote this in the early 1990s when she was trying to explain why it was, and she was explaining it to CODESRIA. She was explaining it at a conference at CODESRIA. She said it became clear that what men and women do is not so much determined by God or by biology as socially constructed, according to the prevailing cultures and exigencies of a given context or location. It became scientifically necessary to distinguish between biology and sociology, etc., etc. And that word scientifically necessary is a very important phrase for me in this quotation, because it means that as an intellectual act, in order to understand the politics of a situation, the separation of this thing called sex, with a little e, as opposed to sex, with a deep voice, to separate it from gender. Yes, it happened in a colonial language, in English, and we need to talk about that. But it became part of an intellectual act to be able to understand political space. So, one model, and again, this is just revising what we did yesterday, for illustrating yesterday's basic concepts. You see over there on your, can you see this clearly enough? On your, right. There's the process of sexing. Baby pops out and the verb is not pop. And it says like underneath, complex biochemical algorithm. Lots of forces working together, not just outside genitals. Lots and lots of forces. And that it creates predictions about becoming gendered. And those predictions involve labor, where you work, how you work, what your priority zone of work is. So that if you pop out and somebody says, oh, that is Koliswa, which is a female name, then the prediction is that she will work, her priority work is building a family. Okay, that's her priority work. The prediction around authority, okay, we're dealing with, I'm using stereotypes at the moment, so we're going to need to unpack that. But if you're born Farid as opposed to Farida, okay, the prediction might be that Farida only holds religious authority in the home. She doesn't hold it in the mosque. That's the prediction. We don't know if that will happen, but that's the prediction. Farid can become the imam. Farida, her spiritual authority in the home. That's the prediction. What we call performativity. How you dress, how you move, how you speak, what rituals you partake in, how you partake in. There'll be predictions about that. And finally, this is the connecting point that Sylvia was getting to yesterday. All these predictions involve predictions about sexuality. That actually becoming gendered involves predictions about sexuality. And these predictions, Sylvia talked about this as intersectionality, they're located within specific cultural, political, historical contexts. Some of the predictions travel. We live in a global age, but they're always negotiated. And sexuality, Sylvia reminded us, very, very complex term. Mumbi Machera, Kenyan theorist, talking about it as being multifaceted, deep emotional feeling, issues of power, vulnerability, and the scope of sexuality, socially constructed. Sylvia reminded us that sexuality, it's an umbrella term, right? I'm still in the 15 minutes where we're doing a bit of summary. And I just started to unpack this. What does it mean it's an umbrella term? We talked yesterday about how most people hear the term English in sex as sex, and they think, hoo, 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 hoo. That's it. No, that is not what we're talking about in relation to sexualities. There's so many different elements. Sexual beliefs and ideology, what you think sexuality is, sexual knowledges, sexual activities, and sexual experiences. And can I remind you, this is very, very important, that there is a huge difference between sexual experiences and sexual knowledges. What you have experienced sexually, you might think constitutes all the knowledge there is to have about sexuality. But the reality of it is that most of us have had very limited sexual experience. How many partners? What has that been like? What's worked? How much of it has been difficult? How much of it has been easy? How much of it has been involved with our health, with childbearing, with violence? Our own sexual experiences are extremely limited as individuals. We may have seen some other people having sex. How many people in this room have witnessed? Not on the TV. People having sex in which you were not involved.
Seen or heard?
Seen.
It's common.
It's very few, right? It's very few. It depends where you live. It depends how you grew up, how many people were in your house. It depends all sorts of things. But the majority of people do not have very much or very wide sexual experience. That means that when we start to talk about sexual knowledges, our own experience is important, but it cannot be confined to that. And that's a space in which learning and unlearning has to take place. Sexual fantasies, sexual desires, sexual identities. We weren't very clear yesterday about what this means. A sexual identity is an identity in relation to sexual activity. So that, for example, your sexual identity might be one in which you know that you are happiest being pursued, whether you're a man or a woman. You can say, actually, the thing that I feel happiest with, I want to pursue. My culture says I can't pursue or I must pursue, but my sexual identity is I prefer to be a bit passive in this. Other people might say, no, me, I want to put myself out there. I only feel happy if I'm in. That's your sexual identity, what you like. It has nothing to do with your gender, nothing. It has to do with who you are sexually. Experiences, health, capacity. In other words, what is your sexual capacity? That might have to do with your physical abilities, your psychological abilities. It will certainly have to do with your experiences. If your experience of sex is one of continual violation, your capacity to engage in that area is going to be very limited and very traumatizing. If your capacity has been influenced constantly by experiences of pleasure, your capacity is going to grow, right? Sexual relationships, sexual cultures, sexual spaces. Many, many ways of thinking about what sexuality as a term encompasses. So where do we end up? And this is bringing us out of yesterday into today. The model, sexing, predicting sexuality through the process of becoming gendered. Certainly heterosexuality, predicted as the norm by many societies. If you pop out as CODESRIA in society, woman's name, you are predicted to be attracted to CODESRIA, male name. That's the prediction. If you pop out as Maria, you are predicted to be attracted to Michelle. Michael. But what happens if you pop out as Farid and you are attracted to Polisa? Man, that's not predicted, right? And in addition, let me remind you, and this is something we're going to come back to when we talk about sexual orientation. The talk today, it's all about sexual orientation in relation to same gender desire. Many of us, all of us in this room, come from contexts in which the meaning of sexual orientation that was the most pleased was not about gender, it was about race. That if Xhosa, man, it's a Xhosa name, so Southern Africa, South Africa, particular areas, if he was attracted to Jane, that is an orientation that was heavily, heavily, heavily policed within colonial structures, cross-race, cross-ethnicity. That is the biggest field in which sexual orientation historically has been legislated. It's been called miscegenation, it's been called purity of races, da-da-da-da-da. So now when we're talking orientation, we talk gender. But for centuries, we have talked race as the borders across which legislation occurred. And that's something we're going to have, because if I say, Xhosa is born, he's attracted to Farid, okay? Yes, we are looking at the normativity of heteronormativity as being their problem. But they also come from different religions, different racializations, different historical spaces. And when Farid brings Xhosa home, his parents are going to say, "Huh, you are in love with a man." And when they get over that, they're going to say, "But he's Xhosa, we are Muslim." And that will be a bigger problem. That will be a bigger problem. So let's not forget that we are working not only with the issue of gender in constructing orientation, but other vectors as well. It's going to become very important tomorrow. Now, getting to the end of this little slide, we can see the way in which connections between becoming gendered and sexualities are political. They organize power, right? And how do they do this? Through practices of what we call surveillance and control. So some get power, others don't. And these practices, they are interested in maintaining current economies and social inequalities. And they're very wide-ranging. They include language, internalized colonialisms, what we believe about ourselves, and patriarchal knowledges, social surveillance, where we say the way things work, and the law, others, all these practices. And these practices, they don't work as a block. They're not like, you can't say, it's in the law, it's in education. It's like each of these practices are complex. They're visible and invisible, and they're always changing. They're always in flux. And people resist them, right? This is something we're going to talk a lot about when we get to Friday. Even though there's these predictions, everybody resists. Everybody sometimes conforms, sometimes resisting. And some of those resistances in negotiation with power creates challenges. For example, there are changing ideas about the meaning of fatherhood and childcare. There are changing ideas about family formations. These are spaces in which resistance to predictions and to ideas about what is normal and how we want to live together are in flux. And why would we be crazy enough to enter this world as researchers? Again, something I'm going to return to on Friday. But the history of the social sciences, the history of knowledges about African located bodies, relationships, cultures, and civilizations includes some very, very dangerous ideas about African sexualities. Colonial anthropology was obsessed with African sexualities. How people looked, their rituals, their bodies, their weird practices, their funny languages, their practices of polygamy and all that. I mean, colonialism has set up the idea, and Morris was looking at this yesterday a little bit. Within social science, there are already some very dangerous ideas about African sexualities. We need to get in there. Those ideas create policies, create power relations that are very dangerous. And one of those is the paradigm of development. That from a very long time ago, and we will look at the trajectories of this, Africans have been seen as sexualized victims, right? And most recently, victims of HIV, victims of sexual ignorance, victims of sexual violence. They're homogenized, it's all Africans together within the development paradigm. And what are they in need of? Development. They must be developed. It's like, whoopsie daisy. How do we engage with this? How do we trouble these knowledges? And these creations of knowledges have an effect on the circulation of power. So if you want funding, okay, for your own research proposal, you are much likelier to get it if you say, oh, I want to research the poor victims of conflict who have been raped in the DRC, and they are so sad, and I am so shocked by them, and I want to help. Now, let us face it, there are survivors of sexual violence in the DRC. For sure, for sure, for sure. But how are we going to present their relationship to reality in a way that doesn't consistently position the continent as a victim? We have to think about that. And we want to take our place. The question is, why do we want to enter this terrain as researchers? We want to take our place at the continental and global forefront of knowledges needed to design and sustain equitable societies. That's why we're in the space. That's what we're up to. Are we alone? Are we alone? Is it just us? And now we're moving into the text for, we've come out of yesterday and we're moving into the focus of today. Who has been here before us? Here we are. The F word. Good morning, Bennett. The F word. Feminisme. Let us have a look at this word. Sally raised it very concretely yesterday as a challenge to our intellectual revolution. And that was a very useful thing to do because it is the space we want to go into today. It is a very dangerous thing that Sylvia has done, giving me this space. Because the truth of the matter is that you are now not going to get out of this room until 2015. Sorry. There